During World War II, when the world was full of fear and the need for revenge, a strange idea popped into the mind of a man who wasn't a soldier or a weapons expert, but just a dentist who loved bats. Dr. Lytle S. Adams was in his small Pennsylvania office when news of the Pearl Harbor attack shook America. While thinking about the bats he watched during his yearly trips to Carlsbad Caverns, he noticed something interesting. He saw how these tiny creatures flew at night and hid in dark corners during the day. That moment sparked an idea that would cost millions of dollars and keep dozens of scientists busy for years. While the world focused on building regular bombs, Adams dreamed of a very different weapon. He imagined a swarm of bats, each carrying a tiny spark of fire, flying over Japanese cities at night. They would sneak into wooden and paper houses, starting hundreds of fires all at once. This idea, which sounded like science fiction, turned into a secret project approved by President Roosevelt himself, who was known for supporting wild ideas during the war. In secret labs across America, scientists started working to make this dream real. The challenges were huge. How do you make a bat carry a bomb? How do you keep it alive during a long flight? How do you control where it flies? There were so many questions and not enough answers. At Carlsbad Air Base, where most of the tests happened, scientists worked day and night under a lot of pressure. One engineer, Jack Vansel, wrote in his journal, "We were trying to do the impossible, taming something that can't be tamed, turning wild creatures into precise weapons. The first tests were almost like a dark comedy. Bats escaped from their containers, bombs went off too soon, and fires started in the wrong places. Once, a group of runaway bats set fire to an entire airplane hangar, causing huge losses and nearly ending the project. But every failure taught a new lesson, and every mistake brought them closer to a solution. As the research went on, tough scientific problems came up. How do you make a tiny firebomb small enough for a bat to carry, but strong enough to start a big fire? After months of tests, chemists created a special napalm mix that could fit into a capsule no heavier than a coin. The bigger problem was timing. How do you make sure the bombs go off after the bats settle in buildings and not before? Solutions came slowly, and each test showed a new issue. By 1944, the project had used up tons of money, but progress was slow. At the same time, the Manhattan Project, which was building the atomic bomb, started showing better results. Military leaders had tense meetings, arguing about which projects to fund. Colonel Wilson, who led the BAT project, tried hard to save it, but change was coming fast. In the end, the decision was no surprise. The project was stopped. The millions spent were gone, and the scientists who worked years on this odd dream went back to their old jobs. But the story didn't end there. Years later, when secret documents were released, they showed how close the project came to working. Modern studies suggest the idea might have succeeded with more time. The main problem was the bats themselves. They were too unpredictable. After 2 years of intense tests, scientists learned that these small creatures had a free will that was hard to control. At Carlsbad Labs, where over 300 field tests were done, bats acted differently in open air than in cages. Some refused to leave their cooled containers, while others flew straight toward any light, ignoring their set targets. Colonel James Wilkinson, who oversaw the technical side, wrote in his final report, "We spent $1.7 million trying to understand a creature that weighs less than an ounce, and we still can't predict its moves for more than 30 seconds after release." The problem grew worse because guiding the bats was so hard. While scientists got bats to carry the right weight, they couldn't find a good way to steer them toward specific targets. The Carlsbad disaster in August 1943 was just the start. In the months that followed, more accidents nearly cost the U.S. Army dearly. In one secret test in Utah, escaped bats started forest fires that burned for 3 days, destroying 17,000 acres of farmland. The most embarrassing incident happened when a test group of bats flew off course into a small town near the base, causing panic as people thought it was a Japanese chemical attack. Declassified reports later showed these accidents cost the Army what would be $12 million today, plus a lot of embarrassment. The project's reputation sank, with top officers jokingly calling it Project Dracula. By mid-1944, it was clear the military couldn't fund every big idea. They had to pick the projects that worked best. The Bat Bomb Project started losing out to the Manhattan Project, which showed more promise. General Leslie Groves, who ran the Manhattan Project, wrote about a key meeting in May 1944. We had to choose between atomic bombs that could destroy whole cities or bats that might start a few fires. The math was clear. His team's analysis showed that one atomic bomb would be 1,000 times deadlier than even the best bat bomb attack. Scaling up was another huge issue. To make the project work, the Army needed at least 1 million bats a month. But catching that many started to harm the environment in the Southwest, where bats help control farm pests. Reports showed bat numbers dropping fast. Captain Richardson, who handled logistics, wrote a worrying report. To get the numbers we need, we'd wipe out every bat colony in the continent in 18 months. Transporting bats was also a nightmare. They needed exact temperature and humidity, and 22% died during transport, making costs too high. By 1944, the U.S. strategy in the Pacific War had changed. As American forces moved closer to Japan, they needed weapons with big strategic impact to force Japan to surrender, not limited destruction. Colonel John Hyman, a strategy expert, wrote a detailed report saying, "The bat bomb is more of a psychological scare than a real weapon. It might cause civilian panic, but it won't shift the war's balance." This view hit home with decision-makers looking for a knockout blow to end the war. There was also growing worry about public reaction if people learned animals were used as weapons. While American propaganda criticized Japan's biological weapons, using bats could cause a big political embarrassment. White House media advisor John Bryant warned in a secret memo that pictures of burning bats over Japanese cities could turn into a public relations nightmare. These fears resonated with an administration very sensitive to America's global image. On January 15, 1944, a critical meeting decided the project's fate. Over 8 hours, reports showed costs had ballooned 320% over budget. Field tests had only a 17% success rate, and it would take at least 3 more years to get real results. Major General William Donovan, head of the Office of Strategic Services, summed it up. "We gave the idea its chance, but war doesn't wait for our crazy dreams." In the vote that followed, the committee agreed to stop the project and shift its resources elsewhere. But the story didn't fully end. Some technologies developed, like tiny firebombs and precise timing systems, later helped other weapons. Dr. Adams, the idea's creator, stayed convinced until his death in 1969 that his bats could have changed the war with enough time. In his personal notes, he wrote, "They wanted a weapon to scare people, but they forgot real fear comes from the unknown." And now for our second story. Let's talk about the legendary war pigeon. In the spring of 1918, World War I had been dragging on for 4 years, and everyone was worn out. In France, soldiers fought in muddy trenches under constant gunfire. Germany launched a huge attack, hoping to win before American troops showed up. The trenches stretched for hundreds of kilometers, packed with British, French, and American soldiers. They lived in terrible conditions, wet, cold, hungry, and always scared. The air smelled like gunpowder and death, and the cold froze their hands and feet. Communication during the war was basic. Radios were unreliable, and telephone lines often got cut by artillery fire. In this setting, carrier pigeons became a key way to send messages. These birds were trained carefully to carry coded notes across trenches, delivering military orders or reports about enemy movements. Pigeons flew through gunfire, dodging danger, and often saved soldiers' lives by getting messages through just in time. These birds were a symbol of hope in the chaos, showing bravery and strength in the face of death. The Battle of the Somme, which started in 1916 and lingered into 1918, was one of history's bloodiest fights. Trenches in that area were packed with hungry, cold, and tired soldiers. They relied on pigeons to send messages when other methods failed. In these harsh conditions, a strange story emerged about a carrier pigeon named Lucy, who became an unexpected hero in a crucial battle near the Somme River. Lucy was a small bird with white and black feathers and shiny eyes, famous for her courage and ability to dodge shells. She was cared for by a British unit led by Lieutenant Oliver Cooper, a 25-year-old officer from Manchester. Oliver was a kind-hearted man, weighed down by the responsibility of leading his men in impossible conditions. His blonde hair was always caked with mud, and his blue eyes showed the war's toll. Nightmares of battles haunted him, but he found comfort in caring for the carrier pigeons, especially Lucy, who he saw as a sign of hope. With him were his team: Sergeant George Taylor, a tough 32-year-old from London who hid his fear with sarcastic jokes; Private Thomas Reed, a shy 19-year-old from rural Devon who loved animals and looked after the pigeons with care; and Private Edward "Eddie" Smith, a rebellious 21-year-old from Liverpool, struggling with the war's mental scars. On a rainy April morning in 1918, the unit was under heavy pressure. German forces launched a surprise attack, and shelling destroyed the telephone lines, making contact with headquarters impossible. The soldiers huddled in a muddy trench as shells exploded around them, filling the air with the smell of gunpowder and death. Oliver stood in the trench, trying to calm his men. He looked at George and said, tired, "George, things are getting worse. If we don't call for backup, we'll be wiped out by night." George, wiping mud off his rifle, said, "Sir, the phone's dead and the radio's useless. There's no hope." Thomas stepped up, holding a small cage with Lucy inside. He said quietly, "Sir, Lucy's ready. She can carry the message to headquarters." Oliver looked at Thomas, then the cage, and said, "Thomas, this is our last shot. If Lucy fails, we all fail." Eddie, sitting in the trench, scoffed, "A pigeon? We're relying on a bird. This war's a joke." George snapped, "Eddie, shut it, or I'll make you fly with her." Oliver wrote a short note asking for urgent backup, tucked it into a tiny tube, and tied it to Lucy's leg. He opened the cage, and Lucy flew into the smoky sky. The soldiers watched nervously as shells burst around her. Thomas whispered, "Come on, Lucy. Don't let us down." But suddenly, a piece of shrapnel hit Lucy's wing, and she fell into a nearby forest. Eddie shouted, "We're done!" Even the pigeon failed. Oliver, firm, said, "No, it's not over. We're going to save Lucy. She's our only hope." Oliver led a small team, George, Thomas, and Eddie, through the burning forest. The mission was dangerous, with German snipers lurking and shells exploding constantly. Mud slowed their steps, and smoke stung their eyes. As they moved, they heard a faint flutter of wings. They found Lucy lying under a tree, her wing injured but still alive. Thomas picked her up gently and said, "Lucy, you brave girl, you did the impossible." George, looking around, said, "Sir, snipers are close. We need to go now." Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. Eddie was hit in the shoulder and fell. He yelled, "I'm hit! Leave the pigeon and run." Oliver refused, saying, "No one gets left behind, not even Lucy." Thomas carried Lucy while George helped Eddie stand. The team made it back to the trench under a hail of bullets. In the trench, Thomas bandaged Lucy's wing with a small cloth and said, "Sir, she can fly again. Let's give her another chance." Oliver released Lucy once more, and this time she soared high, dodging shells until she vanished over the horizon. The next hours were tense. The soldiers fought fiercely, but hope was fading. Eddie, holding his injured shoulder, said, "If Lucy doesn't make it, I got shot for nothing." George replied, "Eddie, if Lucy pulls through, I'll get her a medal." Suddenly, they heard distant cannon fire. Oliver looked at his men and said, "That's our backup." Lucy did it. The reinforcements arrived just in time, and the unit pushed back the German attack. When they returned to headquarters, they found Lucy in her cage. She had delivered the message successfully. George shouted, "Lucy, you're a hero, better than any soldier here." Eddie, smiling despite the pain, said, "I can't believe I almost died for a pigeon, but she's worth it." Lucy's story was one of the strangest from World War I. When basic technology failed, this little pigeon proved more reliable than wires or radios. Lucy became a symbol of hope among soldiers, and her story spread through the trenches, inspiring them to keep going despite despair. Carrier pigeons were a vital part of the war, but Lucy stood out for her amazing bravery. After the war, Lucy was honored in military records and became a legend among British soldiers. Her story inspired books and films about animals in wars, showing that hope can come from the simplest creatures. Lucy was a reminder that even in a cruel war, there were moments of humanity and strangeness that stay etched in history. And now for our third story. Let's talk about the Christmas truce of 1914. In the summer of 1914, a huge war broke out, called World War I. It was one of the deadliest fights in history. Europe split into two big groups: the Allies, led by Britain, France, and Russia, and the Axis, led by Germany and Austria-Hungary. At first, everyone was excited. Young men rushed to join the army, dreaming of glory and winning. But by winter, those dreams turned into nightmares. On the Western Front, in places like Flanders, Belgium, the war got stuck in muddy trenches. These were long, dirty ditches where soldiers lived like rats, freezing, hungry, and scared of snipers or bombs. Between the trenches was a scary place called No Man's Land, full of dead bodies, barbed wire, and bomb craters. British and German soldiers suffered the same: wet boots, bad food, and the constant sound of explosions. In this dark time, Christmas Eve 1914 came. Christmas was a time for peace and hope in Christian Europe, but in the war, hope felt far away. Yet, on December 24th in Flanders, something amazing happened. A moment that broke the rules of war and showed the human side of the soldiers fighting. How did a battlefield turn into a place of laughter and song? Let's dive into this incredible story. Thomas Smith, a 22-year-old British soldier from London, sat in his trench with his buddies in the 5th Lancashire Battalion. The cold bit his bones, and mud covered his worn boots. He held a cup of cold tea, staring into the dark. The trench was narrow, barely 6 feet wide, and smelled of gunpowder and rot. Next to him, his friend Jim Wilkins, a grumpy soldier from Manchester, tried to light a wet cigarette. Suddenly, a strange sound broke the silence. It wasn't a bomb or a gunshot. It was singing. From the German trench, less than 100 yards away, soldiers started singing "Silent Night" in soft, touching voices. Thomas looked up, shocked, and said, "Jim, you hear that? They're singing. What kind of Germans are these?" Jim puffed his cigarette and muttered, "It's Christmas, Tom." "But they're the enemy. Maybe it's a trick to get us out and shoot." But the singing went on, and the Germans lit tiny candles, placing them on their trench edges. The lights looked like stars in the dark sky. The British soldiers glanced at each other. Some laughed, others stayed suspicious. Then a young soldier named William Baker, who loved to sing before the war, decided to join in. He sang, "O Come, All Ye Faithful," with his sweet voice. Soon, his friends joined, and the trenches turned into a weird choir, voices rising over no man's land. Out of nowhere, a German soldier named Karl Müller, a 19-year-old from Munich, popped up holding a sign that read, "No shooting tonight," in English. Karl wore a gray army coat, his helmet tilted on his head. He raised his hands to show he had no weapons and stepped carefully into no man's land. In the British trench, everyone froze. Jim hissed, "Tom, don't move." It could be a trap, but Thomas, feeling curious and hopeful, took a chance. He grabbed a pack of cigarettes, jumped out of the trench, and walked slowly toward Karl. They stopped in the middle of no man's land, eyeing each other carefully. Then Karl broke the silence, saying in broken English, "I'm Karl. Merry Christmas. Want a cigarette?" Thomas smiled, offered his pack, and said, "I'm Thomas. Merry Christmas to you too." This moment started something wild. More soldiers from both sides climbed out of their trenches, hesitant at first, then braver. They brought simple gifts: cigarettes, chocolate, canned meat, even family photos. A British soldier named Alfred showed a German a picture of his little sister. "This is Emily. She's 10. Got a family?" he asked. The German, Hans, pulled out a photo of his mom and said, "This is my mom in Berlin. I miss her a lot." In an unbelievable moment, a German soldier named Werner brought an old soccer ball from his trench. It was beat up, but good enough to spark excitement. Werner grinned and said, "Why not play a game? Germany versus England. Right here, right now." The British soldiers laughed, and soon a friendly match began in no man's land. The ground was full of holes and barbed wire, but that didn't stop them. The soldiers kept their helmets on and kicked the ball, cheering and laughing. Thomas ran after it, yelling, "Jim, pass it. Let's beat 'em." Jim laughed back, "Beat 'em? They're playing like champs." The game was messy, with no clear rules, but it was full of fun. At one point, Karl scored a goal for the Germans, and everyone cheered, even the British. The match lasted about an hour and ended in a friendly tie. Afterward, the soldiers sat together, sharing food and stories. A British soldier named George told Carl about his dream of being a farmer after the war, while Carl talked about loving music. At dawn on December 25th, the truce started to fade. Orders came from commanders on both sides to start fighting again. The soldiers said goodbye sadly. Thomas told Carl, "Maybe we'll meet someday, not as enemies." Carl nodded. "I hope so, my friend." They returned to their trenches and the war went on. But that night left a deep mark on their hearts. Why was the Christmas truce so strange? Because it broke all the war's rules. In one moment, enemies became friends, sharing food, laughs, and even a soccer game. It showed that kindness can shine even in the darkest times. But the truce made military leaders angry, who thought it weakened the will to fight. In later years, strict orders stopped anything like it from happening again. This story inspired movies like Joyeux Noël and books like All Quiet on the Western Front. It became a symbol of hope, showing that people can come together even in tough times. It also made people wonder about war. Were soldiers fighting for a cause, or were they just tools for their leaders? Today, memorials in Flanders honor this truce, a lesson in the power of human connection. It's a story that reminds us wars may end, but moments of kindness last forever. All right. Now, for the fourth story, let's talk about the ghost radio of Vietnam. In the early 1970s, the Vietnam War was at its fiercest. The United States was stuck in a long, costly fight against North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. The war, which started to stop communism during the Cold War, had turned into a human and political disaster. American soldiers battled in Vietnam's thick jungles, where sticky heat, bugs, and deadly traps tested their will. Fights happened in tough conditions. The Viet Cong used sneaky guerrilla tactics, hiding in tunnels and launching surprise attacks, while U.S. forces relied on air raids and high-tech weapons. Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, was the hub for U.S. military operations, but also a chaotic city where soldiers mixed with locals, spies, and informants. Soldiers were worn out, both mentally and physically, haunted by fear of an invisible enemy. In this tense setting, something spooky popped up that scared and fascinated U.S. troops: ghost radio. This was a mysterious radio station sending coded messages and creepy music through military radios, aimed at American soldiers. The messages, often in broken English with a calm, eerie female voice, predicted defeat and spooked listeners. This was part of a psychological war by the Viet Cong to weaken U.S. soldiers' spirits. But what made ghost radio really weird was the mystery around it. Who ran this station? How did they know so much about the soldiers? Why did the messages feel like they came from another world? Our story follows a young American soldier named Tom Harrison and his team as they faced this strange phenomenon in Vietnam's jungles and uncovered the truth behind ghost radio in a tense, mysterious adventure. The Vietnam War was unlike other wars. There were no clear battle lines, just scattered fights in dense jungles, muddy swamps, and remote villages. American soldiers, mostly young guys in their 20s, faced an enemy they rarely saw. The Viet Cong used tunnels to move, planted mines, and attacked at night. Soldiers lived in constant stress, where any jungle sound could mean danger. Radios were key for communication, but they became a source of fear when ghost radio hijacked their signals. The station's messages were odd and creepy. They often started with traditional Vietnamese music, followed by a woman's voice nicknamed Hanoi Hannah, though this was different from Hanoi's official broadcasts. The messages predicted U.S. losses or shared scarily accurate details about troop movements. They freaked soldiers out, seeming to know their names, locations, and even personal fears. Soldiers wondered, was there a traitor among them? Did the enemy have super tech? Or was something supernatural behind these messages? In this setting, Tom Harrison, a 22-year-old soldier from Ohio, served in a scout unit in the Mekong Delta. Tom was tall, with light brown hair and blue eyes, carrying both courage and fear. He joined the Army out of duty, but soon learned war wasn't what he imagined. Nightmares haunted him, and Ghost Radio's voice chased him every time he turned on his radio. Our story begins when Tom and his team got a dangerous mission: find and destroy Ghost Radio's source in an adventure that would change their lives. On a dark October night in 1971, the Mekong Delta's jungles were cloaked in thick fog. Soldier Tom Harrison led a small scout team of 5. Sergeant Frank Davis, a tough 30-year-old New Yorker known for his grit and sharp humor. Carlos Ramirez, a 20-year-old from Texas who loved joking but feared jungles. James Jim Wheeler, a radio expert from California. And Michael Chang, a calm 23-year-old medic from Chicago. Their risky mission: track the signal of Ghost Radio, which was scaring U.S. troops. The team moved carefully through the jungle, where thick trees blocked moonlight and strange sounds filled the air: buzzing bugs, trickling water, and sometimes a distant gunshot. Tom carried a portable radio, trying to catch the mysterious station's signal. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the silence from the radio. The team stopped, staring at Tom. Sad Vietnamese music played, followed by a calm, creepy female voice. "Hello, American soldiers. Why fight? Go home. The war is lost. Tom Harrison, you're far from Ohio. Your mom waits for you. You won't return if you stay here." Tom froze. How did the station know his name? He looked at his team, who stared back, shocked and scared. Frank said sharply, "Tom, what's going on? How do they know your name? Is there a traitor here?" Tom, trying to stay calm, said, "I don't know, Frank. But this isn't normal. That voice, it's like it's inside my head." Carlos, gripping his rifle nervously, said, "Man, this is spooky stuff. Maybe jungle ghosts are talking to us." Jim, tweaking the radio, said, "It's not ghosts, Carlos. It's tech. Someone's messing with us, and we need to find out who." Their mission was clear: find the signal's source. The team followed the radio signal, which led to a remote jungle area near an abandoned village. The air was heavy with tension. They knew the Viet Cong could be hiding anywhere. As they moved, Ghost Radio kept broadcasting. Another message came. "Frank Davis, from New York. Miss your family? You won't see them again if you keep walking in this jungle." Frank glared at Tom and said angrily, "That's enough. I'm not scared of a lady's voice on the radio. Let's find these jerks and end this." Michael, looking worried, said, "Frank, calm down. They're trying to scare us. It's psychological warfare." Carlos, shaking, said, "I don't like this, guys. This jungle's cursed. I heard stories about dead soldiers' spirits here." Tom said firmly, "Enough, Carlos. We're soldiers. We'll find the truth, even if it's ghosts." After hours of walking, they reached the abandoned village. The wooden huts were falling apart, surrounded by trees like a natural wall. Jim checked the radio and said, "The signal's strong here. The source is close. It's probably in one of these huts." But before they moved, another radio message came. "You're very close, soldiers, but you won't find us. Death waits for you." The team paused. Fear crept into their hearts, but Tom pushed forward. He said, "Don't let that voice control you. They know we're close and want to scare us. We're not backing down now." Frank nodded. "You're right, Tom. But if this is a trap, I'll get you before the enemy does." They searched the village carefully, checking huts one by one. In one hut, they found an old radio, but it was abandoned. Jim was checking wires when he heard soft footsteps. He whispered, "Did you hear that? Someone's here." Before anyone could answer, a young girl, maybe 12, in ragged clothes appeared. She looked at them with wide eyes and said in broken English, "You look for radio. I know where it is, but dangerous." The soldiers were stunned. Tom asked, "Who are you?" "How do you know about the radio?" The girl, named Lynn, said calmly, "I'm from the village. I know the radio. It's in a tunnel underground, but Viet Cong are there." Frank looked at Tom and said, "Tom, do we trust this kid?" "It could be a trap." Michael said, "She's a child, Frank. She might be telling the truth, but we need to be careful." Tom decided to trust Lynn. She led them to a hidden tunnel entrance under a huge tree. The tunnel was narrow and dark, smelling of dirt and mold. As they crawled through, the radio crackled again. "Tom Harrison, you're in the tunnel now. You'll never leave it." Tom stopped and whispered, "They know where we are. We must be really close." Carlos, trembling, said, "Oh man, Tom, this isn't right. Let's get out." Tom shook his head. "No, Carlos, we're here. We'll finish this." At the tunnel's end, they found a small underground room. An old radio sat there, with a young woman beside it, surrounded by wires and gear. She was the source of ghost radio. She looked at them calmly and said, "You found me, but you won't stop me." Before anyone could respond, a Viet Cong fighter appeared from the shadows, sparking a quick fight. The team took control, but the woman escaped through another tunnel. Tom wanted to destroy the radio, but Jim said, "Wait, Tom. We can use this to send fake messages to the Viet Cong." The team decided to turn the station into a tool for their side. With Lynn's help, who knew the area well, they sent false messages to the Viet Cong, helping save other U.S. units. But the mystery of the woman, now called Jungle Ghost, lingered. Ghost radio was one of the strangest things in the Vietnam War. The station was part of the Viet Cong's psychological war to break U.S. soldiers' spirits. What made it weird was how scarily accurate the messages were, seeming to know personal details about soldiers. Later, it was clear the Viet Cong used local informants like Lynn to gather info, but the station's mystery kept people guessing. This story shows the power of psychological warfare. With just a woman's voice and a simple radio, the Viet Cong scared U.S. soldiers. But Tom's team, with Lynn's help, turned the tool against the enemy. Ghost radio became a legend among soldiers, inspiring stories and books about psychological warfare in Vietnam. Today, ghost radio remains a symbol of mystery and creativity in wars. It reminds us that war isn't just about weapons. It's also a battle of minds and hearts. Tom and Lynn's story shows that hope and bravery can shine in the strangest moments, even in a jungle full of ghosts. Now, for our fifth story, let's talk about the legendary monkeys of World War II. In the summer of 1942, World War II was raging. Europe was in chaos, with Nazi forces led by Adolf Hitler taking over most of the continent. Britain, led by Winston Churchill, fought hard to keep its key spots. One was Gibraltar, a big rock at the entrance to the Mediterranean Sea. Gibraltar controlled ships moving between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean, making it a big target for Germany and Italy, who wanted to block British supplies. British soldiers in Gibraltar were under huge stress. Air raids hit day and night, and supplies were low because of sea blockades. Life in the rocky forts was rough. Soldiers slept in cold caves, ate bad canned food, and always feared a sudden attack. The mountain itself, with its tough terrain and sharp rocks, felt like a natural jail. Strong winds carried salty sea spray, and the hot sun made outdoor work hard. In this grim setting, something odd added a strange twist to the war. The Barbary macaques, wild monkeys living on Gibraltar's rocks. These monkeys, there for centuries, weren't just animals. They were a cultural and legendary symbol for locals and soldiers. A legend said, as long as the monkeys stay on the mountain, Gibraltar will stay British. Stories say the monkeys came in the 1700s, maybe brought by North African traders or soldiers. Over time, they became part of Gibraltar's identity, loved despite their naughty habit of stealing food. The monkeys climbed rocks super fast, jumped from tree to tree, and caused chaos in army camps, giving soldiers something to laugh about in tough times. But by 1942, the monkey numbers were dropping. German bombings wrecked their homes, and food from locals stopped because of the war. From about 40 monkeys, only 15 were left. This worried the soldiers, who saw it as bad luck. In this moment, Winston Churchill made a weird choice: protect the monkeys at all costs. Let's dive into this strange story of war, legends, and animals. On a sunny July morning in 1942, Lieutenant Albert Jones, a 24-year-old British officer from Liverpool, stood at a lookout on Gibraltar. Albert was a practical guy who cared about army rules and didn't believe in superstitions. He wore a dusty uniform, his helmet tilted from the strong winds. Next to him, Sergeant John Clark, a religious man from Yorkshire, tried to light a wet cigarette. John stared at a small monkey jumping on a nearby rock and said, "Albert, something's weird. The monkeys are vanishing. I saw 10 here yesterday, now only 5. Albert laughed. "John, are you a monkey expert now? They're just animals." John shook his head, serious. "Don't laugh, mate. Old soldiers say the monkeys are our luck. If they're gone, we'll lose Gibraltar." Albert knew the legend, but didn't take it seriously. Still, he noticed soldiers in the camp talking nervously about the fewer monkeys. One night, as Albert and John ate dinner, a simple meal of canned bread and salty meat, a young soldier, Thomas Williams, a 19-year-old from Cardiff, came up. Thomas said, nervous, "Sir, soldiers say the monkeys aren't coming to camp anymore. They think it's bad luck. Is that true?" Albert looked at Thomas, then John, and said, "Thomas, don't let stories scare you. But I'll look into it." The next day, Albert got an urgent message from Gibraltar's military command, straight from London, and signed by Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Expecting orders about defenses or supplies, Albert was shocked by what he read. He said to John, "By order of the Prime Minister, you must form a team to protect Gibraltar's Barbary macaques. Their survival is vital as a symbol of our strength." John stared, stunned. "Churchill? Caring about monkeys? Is this a joke?" Albert laughed. "No, John. Looks like I'm officially a monkey babysitter." In the days that followed, Albert started his odd mission. He led a small team to feed the monkeys and count them. The team had John Clark, Thomas Williams, and Frank Moore, a cheerful Londoner known for his jokes. They gathered scraps of bread, dried fruit, and even candy from army supplies. But the monkeys were tricky. they'd steal food and run or mess up the camps. One morning, as Albert handed out food to a group of monkeys, a small one named Tommy, named for his mischief, jumped on Albert's shoulder, stole his hat, and ran off. Albert yelled, "Tommy, you little thief, give my hat back." Frank laughed. "Sir, Tommy wants a promotion. He'll be in charge before you." John added, "If he keeps this up, I'll ask Churchill to make him a sergeant." Tommy was the camp's star. A young monkey with a short tail and bright eyes, he loved jumping between rocks and stealing anything. Cigarettes, food cans, you name it. Soldiers loved him and shared stories of his antics. Once, Tommy stole a cigarette and acted like he was smoking it, making everyone laugh. Thomas said, "This monkey's smarter than half the soldiers here," Frank joked. "If Tommy was with the Germans, we'd have lost the war already." One September night in 1942, trouble hit. During a patrol, Albert noticed Tommy was missing. He searched the usual monkey spots but found nothing. He told John, who said, worried, "Albert, Tommy's gone. Guards saw him near the eastern side, close to enemy lines." Albert shouted, "What?" "If Tommy gets to the Germans, it's over. Soldiers love him. They'll think this is bad luck." John groaned. "Seriously? Risking our lives for a monkey?" Albert said firmly. "John, he's not just a monkey. He's a symbol. If we lose him, the soldiers' spirits will drop. We have to find him." Albert led a team of John, Thomas, and Frank to rescue Tommy. The eastern side was dangerous, near enemy lines where snipers hid and bombs could go off any time. Under cover of night, they climbed rough rocks, carrying flashlights and a small net. Everyone was tense. Thomas said, shaky, "Sir, if a sniper gets me over a monkey, I'll haunt Tommy forever." Frank, trying to lighten the mood, said, "Don't worry, Thomas. If we die, I'll ask Churchill to give him a medal." After hours of searching, Albert spotted Tommy on a rock, eating a stolen apple. Albert yelled, "Tommy, you troublemaker, come here." But Tommy, as usual, jumped to another rock, making the soldiers laugh despite the stress. It took 2 days of chasing, with Tommy hiding among rocks and causing chaos. Finally, Albert caught him with a tempting piece of bread. When the team returned to camp with Tommy, soldiers cheered. A soldier named Bill said, "Tommy's our hero. He outsmarted the Germans and came back." Albert, wiping sweat from his face, said, "This monkey's going to give me a heart attack someday." After Tommy's return, he became a symbol of hope in the camp. Soldiers gathered to watch him play or steal food, which eased the war's stress. One night, as German bombs shook the mountain, Albert and Thomas talked about the monkeys. Thomas said, "Sir, these monkeys make me feel we'll win. If they can handle bombs, so can we." Albert nodded. "Maybe the legend's true, Thomas. The monkeys are our luck." In London, Churchill followed reports about the monkeys. In a meeting with his commanders, he said proudly, "Gibraltar's monkeys aren't just animals. They're a symbol of our fight. As long as they're there, we'll stand strong." A general, Harold, asked, "Sir, are we really using resources for monkeys while fighting Hitler?" Churchill replied, "Harold, in war, morale is the strongest weapon. The monkeys are our secret weapon." Why was this story so strange? It shows how a local legend became a military priority during a world war. When Britain faced collapse, the monkeys became a symbol of strength and hope. Churchill's choice to save them shows how powerful symbols can lift spirits. The monkeys didn't fight, but their presence gave soldiers something to protect. The monkeys were also fun and inspiring. During bombings and fear, Tommy and his pals brought laughter and humanity. Tommy, especially, was the camp's hero. His naughty stories spread, making him a symbol of defiance and strength. Even when bombs rocked the mountain, seeing monkeys climb rocks without fear gave soldiers courage. This story shows the human side of wars. Amid destruction, soldiers found hope and laughter in the monkeys. It also highlights the power of symbols in war. The legend tying the monkeys to Gibraltar's survival wasn't just a story. It gave soldiers a bigger reason to fight. Today, Gibraltar's Barbary macaques are a tourist and cultural symbol. They're well cared for and part of the area's heritage. Tommy and his friends' story has inspired books and films about animals in wars, a reminder that hope can come from the strangest places. It's a tale of how a mischievous monkey can become a symbol of strength in tough times. Our sixth and final story is called When the Sky Rained Diesel. On August 2, 1990, Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, invaded Kuwait. This started the Gulf War. The reasons behind the invasion were many. Iraq was struggling with a failing economy, border disputes, and it accused Kuwait of stealing its oil. Iraq took control of Kuwait for 7 months until February 1991, when a U.S.-led military operation called Desert Storm forced Iraqi troops to retreat. But before leaving, the Iraqi army set fire to around 737 Kuwaiti oil wells, causing one of the worst environmental and economic disasters in history. In this story, we'll explain why the war started, why the wells were set on fire, and the major effects of both. The war began because of a mix of historical, political, and economic problems that had built up over decades. After fighting an 8-year war with Iran from 1980 to 1988, Iraq was left deeply in debt, over $80 billion, much of it owed to Gulf countries like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Iraq had borrowed this money to buy weapons and keep its economy running during the war. But when the war ended, Iraq was broke. Kuwait alone had loaned Iraq around $14 billion. Iraq asked for these loans to be forgiven, arguing that it had protected the Gulf countries from the Iranian threat. Kuwait refused, which made tensions worse. At the same time, global oil prices were falling. Countries like Kuwait and the UAE were producing a lot of oil, which caused prices to drop. This was a big problem for Iraq, since it relied almost entirely on oil exports to rebuild its economy. The country also had high unemployment and millions of soldiers returning from war to poor living conditions. This created anger among the people, pushing Saddam to take drastic steps. Another major problem was the Rumaila oil field, which sat on the border between Iraq and Kuwait. Iraq accused Kuwait of stealing oil from its side of the field using a method called slant drilling. Though this claim was never proven, Saddam used it as one of his main excuses for the invasion. He said that Kuwait had cost Iraq billions of dollars through illegal oil extraction. The border dispute between the two countries also had a long history, going back to the time of the Ottoman Empire and British colonization. Kuwait had once been part of the Ottoman province of Basra, but became a British protectorate in 1899. After Iraq became independent in 1932, some Iraqi leaders never accepted Kuwait as a separate country. Even after a failed attempt to invade Kuwait in 1961, Iraq continued to demand ownership of Kuwait's islands like Bubiyan and Warba, saying they were important for access to the Gulf. In the late 1980s, Saddam brought up these old claims again, saying Kuwait was historically part of Iraq, and that British colonial powers had unfairly drawn the current borders. Saddam Hussein also had big dreams of turning Iraq into the dominant power in the Gulf. After the war with Iran, Iraq had one of the biggest armies in the world. Saddam believed that taking over Kuwait would boost Iraq's economy and military strength. Kuwait had nearly 10% of the world's oil reserves. If Iraq took it over, it would control about 20% of the global oil supply, giving it major influence over oil prices. Saddam was also under pressure at home. The economy was collapsing and people were unhappy. Invading Kuwait seemed like a way to distract the public and unite them behind a national cause. Another major reason for the invasion was Kuwait's oil production. Inside OPEC, a group of oil-producing countries, there were limits set to control oil supply and keep prices stable. Iraq believed Kuwait was producing more oil than allowed, which caused oil prices to fall even further. Iraq claimed it was losing about $1 billion a year because of this. The issue was brought up at OPEC meetings in July 1990, but no agreement was reached. The tensions just kept growing. Kuwait was a small country with a weak army, making it an easy target. Other Gulf countries were not prepared to stop Iraq by force. Before the invasion, Saddam met with April Glaspie, the U.S. ambassador to Iraq. During their meeting, she said that the U.S. would not get involved in Arab-Arab disputes. This made Saddam believe that the U.S. wouldn't fight back if he invaded Kuwait. Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt tried to step in and stop the crisis, but they failed. Saddam's personality also played a big role. He saw himself as a legendary leader of the Arab world, like Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser. He felt insulted when Kuwait refused to forgive Iraq's debts or agree to his demands. To him, invading Kuwait was a way to show power and get revenge. The burning of Kuwait's oil wells was one of the biggest environmental disasters in modern history. It happened during Iraq's retreat in early 1991. Saddam ordered his troops to destroy Kuwait's oil infrastructure as part of a scorched earth strategy, aimed at causing maximum damage. The goal was to slow down the U.S.-led coalition's advance. The thick black smoke from the fires blocked visibility, making it harder for air and ground forces to move. Kuwait relied heavily on its oil industry, and destroying it meant wrecking its economy. Saddam wanted to send a message to the Gulf states and the world. Even if Iraq lost the war, it could still cause massive harm. Iraqi forces destroyed about 737 out of 1,000 oil wells in Kuwait. They also damaged oil refineries and storage tanks. Millions of barrels of oil were spilled into the Persian Gulf, creating a major environmental disaster. The destruction began in January 1991 and peaked in February during the retreat. Iraqi engineers used explosives like C4 and dynamite to blow up the wellheads. The high pressure in the wells caused the oil to shoot out and catch fire instantly. The sky filled with thick black smoke, turning Kuwait into a scene from an apocalypse. These fires released around 500 million tons of carbon dioxide and poisonous gases like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides. The smoke clouds were so huge that they darkened the sky even in the middle of the day, creating what people called a black day. Local temperatures dropped by 4 to 6 degrees Celsius because sunlight couldn't get through, a phenomenon scientists called a mini-nuclear winter. About 11 million barrels of oil spilled on land, poisoning the soil and killing plants. Another 10 million barrels were dumped into the sea, killing fish, birds, and other marine life. People living nearby and soldiers involved in putting out the fires suffered from serious breathing problems, and many developed long-term health issues. The fires also halted oil production in Kuwait, costing the country about 5% of global oil output. Oil exports stopped for months. The cost of putting out the fires and fixing the damage was around $12 billion. Cleaning up the pollution took many more years and billions of dollars. That was all for today's stories. Thank you for being here, for listening, for resting. Until next time, rest easy.